and for a meal that turned out to be every bit as good as they said it was. And while we were eating, we were right next to the marimba players. There'd be two gentlemen just wailing away, if you can say that, about the xylophone. And it was beautiful music. And then there was a guy standing very solemnly next to them in a suit with a microphone. And after every song, it would be his job to give the commercial, to make sure people knew about the specials of the day and everything else. And that's me today. We'll get back to the wonderful music in just a couple of minutes. But we went back to conversation among ourselves while the guy was talking, and you can do the same thing. It'll be fun. Who are you? Who were you? Will you be remembered? How will you be remembered? You know, sometimes people are remembered just because they were either standing on the right side or the wrong side of history. You don't remember the name Robert Greene, at least as a famous person probably. He lived from 1560 to 1592, only 32 years, because a lot of his life was spent in rather wasted circumstances. I mean, in terms of his the amount that he drank, ate, and whatever. But he was a very famous playwright in his day. Everybody knew him. His opinions mattered. The only reason he's remembered now is because one of the last things he wrote was this venomous screed in which he complained, among other things, about this upstart crow. He was writing to people that had advanced degrees like him. An upstart crow who has prettified himself with your feathers and imagines that he can bombast a line as well as the best of you. He refers to him as a Johannes Factotum, which means jack of all trades, which means he works with his hands. Who was this person he was so angry and venomous with that he used his last writing breath to complain about? Oh, just some obscure person named William Shakespeare, who didn't have any degrees, who came from common or origins, and yet who happened to be better than all of them. Stephen Douglas was a politician who was famous for his mastery in the Senate for many years, changed policy many times, thought in his own way he was keeping the United States together when it was threatening to fall apart, but we remember him because of the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Lincoln spoke against slavery. Douglas spoke for it, and very eloquently. And matter of fact, it's not remembered by many people that the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates up and down the state of Illinois resulted in the election of Stephen Douglas to the Senate, while Lincoln lost yet one more election. But of course, we really only remember Stephen Douglas because he was on the wrong side of history when it came to slavery. Thomas Dewey was a Hoosier politician. I get Hebrews and Hoosiers mixed up all the time. But he was a Hoosier politician, fairly conservative, but also progressive when it came to certain aspects of workers' rights. Very complex person. But we only remember Thomas Dewey because of a very famous photograph of the man he ran against for president, Harry Truman. Because in the picture, Harry Truman is holding up a newspaper with a banner headline, "Dewey defeats Truman." It wasn't so. Somebody went to press a little too early. But we only remember him, a fascinating character, because of that connection. And in this passage, as Rex told us, a little time has gone by, and now people are telling this incredible news that Jesus is raised from the dead, and that changes everything. It changes everything about our relationship with each other, about the way we act and live, and in what we believe. And as we find out in this passage, the apostles have been arrested, and now they're being taken before the council and being told, "We told you not to preach in this man's name." And it's getting very contentious. Peter and the apostles reply, how can we obey God? And we're going to obey God instead of human authority. And those are fighting words because it's telling these people who are expert in the biblical law, you're wrong. Well, Here's Gamaliel, once again, a towering figure in his age. It was said when he died that the glory of the Torah had gone out forever. He was a student of the famed Hillel, who lived 110 years, and who once asked, can you recite the law of God while standing on one leg? This was from a scoffer, and Hillel replied, sure. And then he stood on one leg, which I don't think I can stand that long, and said simply, whatever you don't want done to you, don't do to somebody else. That's the law. Everything else is commentary. So Gamaliel, matter of fact, one of his most famous pupils was the Apostle Paul. At any rate, but why do we remember Gamaliel? Not for his towering expertise on biblical law and for the respect he had as a person in his time, but because he simply said, let's calm down. Let's send the apostles out of the room, and told the others, we've seen false prophets, Theudas, the Egyptian, Judas, the Galilean. They have their day, and they're gone. But do you want to stand up against somebody who might be working for God? If this thing they are preaching is of human origin, it will fail, just like disco. At least I keep hoping. Thank you. I was supposed to go to the anti-disco night at Comiskey Park, and we got called away to a final exam, and I've always regretted missing that. Man. Anyway. But if it is of God, you can't stand against it. So how will you be remembered? On the right side of history or on the wrong side of history? 50 years ago, at the height of the Civil War struggle, there were many religious leaders who spoke out against equal rights for all human beings. When Martin Luther King wrote his letter from a Birmingham jail, he said his biggest problem wasn't with the haters. It was from the good pastors in the South who told him, you need to give us a little more time, or don't make a fuss, you're making our life really hard. And of course, while many religious conventions later had to apologize for their stance during the civil rights movement, I remember when I was a pastor in Los Angeles in an African American community, and one person said, I was just watching the documentary on the March on Washington that was on TV, and I saw amidst all the signs this sign that said Church of the Brethren in big letters. They were brethren from our Washington office, and some people who even worshiped here at one time have been with us and gone on to their reward. And there are others who were there that day. He didn't know what the Church of the Brethren was before, but our leaders stood up at the right side of history. It's not always popular or easy to stand up on the right side of history. We had another horrible shooting yesterday, and this time it was a little closer to our home territory in California. It might seem obvious that we're against hate, but we have leaders who are either seeming to give permission to the haters or certainly not standing up against them. And when you hear somebody use Jew as a verb, oh, he Jewed me, you don't get to say that. Jews aren't like that. Maybe you need to say something, maybe gently, I don't believe in that, or that's not fair. You wouldn't want somebody to say, he brethrened me, because he was making sure he got every penny he could. He Christianed me, because when the Christianity became legal, they took over as the persecutors. When you hear somebody speaking hatred about blacks or Hispanics or Asians or Muslims or Jews. You're either on the right side of history or you're on the wrong side of history. And the right side of history is God's side of history. Like Gamaliel said, you don't want to be found on the wrong side of history, because sooner or later, people have a better perspective and they realize, what were you thinking, or what was I thinking? Dan West got it right. You know, he was there at a difficult time in the Spanish Civil War trying to pass out powdered milk, and there wasn't enough to go around. And he thought, what these people need is not a cup, but a cow. And from that was born, which was also born here in Elkhart County, the idea of Heifer International, of sending live impregnated animals to hungry people around the world. So they had a way of life and hope and a sign of Christ's love in their midst. And so many good people in this county flocked to that banner on the right side of history, and so many people then around the world take part without ever even knowing this came from us. Not just in a general sense, but us here in this county. So all things are possible when we decide that we choose Jesus, that if there is a resurrected Lord, there might be some claim upon who we are and what we do, what we believe, and how we act. What do we want to be remembered by? You know, when we drive around here, every submerged field has a story. We know which family has been farming it and what they'll be doing as soon as it dries out. Every brick in this building has a story, and we remember the efforts of people that have made this place what it is. Every child has a story, and every one of you has contributed in fantastic ways to the acceptance, their acceptance of the love of Jesus, because the way they know Jesus is the way they know you. So don't be afraid to say the right thing, to do the right thing, to be the right person. Don't be remembered as the one who defended slavery, but the one who worked against it. Don't be remembered as the one who, if they did not actively encourage hate and hate speech and hate actions, seemed to countenance it because it was politically expedient. Remember yourself as the one who was unpopular because you said, that's not me, and that's not Jesus. As Gamaliel said, if this is of human origin, if this is of the wish of humans, then it will not work. It will fall apart. But this is of God. You don't want to be standing against it. And there's this wonderful word. You know, it's a made-up word. It's theomakoi, which is the word for God and war. You don't want to make God war. I don't think it's anywhere else. But he says, you don't want to make God war. None of us do. We've had too much fun with the fish fry. We're having too much fun with the music. And most of all, we're having too much fun with each other. Let us stand with God. Amen.